Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bhakti Fundamentals. Today's class marks the beginning of our series on dovetailing, or harmonizing our lives with the Supreme. We will actually have at least 2 more classes on this subject because it really is the central teaching in Bhakti Yoga. However, before we begin, in our last session you may remember that we delved into the essence of personhood and the impact of being treated in a personal manner versus in an impersonal or dismissive manner by others. We discussed how being a person inherently involves a longing for personal relationships, and this yearning for connection, along with our individual personhood, our distinct personalities and personal traits, originates from the Supreme Person, the Supreme Lord or Krishna, whom we see instructing Arjuna in this painting on screen. So this means that God is a person, but not just any person. He is the Supreme Person. It also means that, like us, he possesses names, qualities, and characteristics, and that he too seeks personal relationships with others, like with all of us. Thus, at the conclusion of last week's discussion, we posed an important question. How can we interact with Krishna, the Supreme Lord, in a personal way? What are some ways we can think of to engage with the Absolute Truth, or God, on a personal level in our everyday lives? And we noted last time that this question lies at the core of Bhakti Yoga. In fact, it is so central to spirituality itself, as it involves creatively bridging our seemingly mundane daily lives with the transcendental, with the Supreme Absolute Truth. Now, to answer this question, last weekend, a group of us from Bhakti Fundamentals engaged in a meaningful discussion on the topic. On that note, this past weekend, our family members visited us, 5 of them actually, over the course of 2 days, and they just happened to be part of Bhakti Fundamentals. So this means that when they visited, they were eager to learn more about Bhakti Yoga. And naturally, when they arrived, we welcomed them in from the chilly winter weather, took care of their coats and scarves, and had a warm, freshly prepared prasadam meal ready for lunch. Prasadam is a word referring to sanctified food, which is offered to the Lord before consumption. We will talk more about prasadam later in our discussion today, actually. And then we talked and caught up and answered the questions of our family members. Primarily, we had nice discussions about how to include Krishna in our daily lives. But we also talked about the books that we're reading, and when they wondered about the clay mridanga drums that we have in our temple room, we showed them how they're played in kirtan, and then taught them some mridanga kirtan beats. That was really fun. Toward the end of the trip, we did some group mantra meditation, and on their way out, we exchanged gifts. They had been interested in books on spiritual topics, and they wanted beads and bead bags so that they could start up a chanting practice of their own. In this way, it was a very nice visit, enriched by deep discussions on spiritual matters, which left everyone feeling very satisfied. Now, why do we mention this visit? There's a reason for it. Just as my husband and I were pleased to welcome our family members into our home, in Bhakti Yoga, we also invite Krishna into our homes. In fact, we take him everywhere we go, actually, but our homes are particularly special places. And this is such an important aspect of spirituality because it consciously brings the Supreme into our most intimate space, our homes, where we unwind and relax. Instead of feeling like the Lord is only present in the temple or in church, if we invite him into our homes, we will feel that he is just as powerfully present in our homes. Now, eventually, we will perceive the presence of the Supreme everywhere, and be able to remain conscious of him always. This world is, after all, his material energy, which in our next class we will learn can be engaged in his service. But we have to start by practicing being conscious of the Supreme in our lives. And by our practice of Bhakti Yoga, we will also eventually perceive his presence in our hearts as well. Remember from one of our previous classes that the Supreme resides in our hearts and the heart of every living entity in his form as Paramatma, or Supersoul. As Paramatma, the Supreme accompanies us at all times and patiently waits for us to turn toward him and engage in his service. Bhakti Yoga helps us to remember that the Supreme is always with us. Now on this point, over the weekend, one of our number asked, if the Supreme already resides in our hearts, why do we need to invite him into our homes? Why do we need to take any external actions to serve him if he is already residing internally in our hearts? Aren't we already spiritual beings? Now, this is an insightful question, and we had an interesting discussion around the answer at the time. We discussed how indeed we are spiritual beings, and the Supreme does reside within our hearts. However, in our current state, we are not always conscious of these truths. As a result, we often act materially rather than spiritually, which does not align with our best interest. The practices of Bhakti Yoga help us to remain conscious of our true identity as spirit souls, and of the ultimate goal of life, which is uncovering and nurturing our personal unique relationship with the Supreme, our Source. Thus, Bhakti Yoga is about actively cultivating the personal relationship that inherently exists between us and the Supreme, a relationship currently obscured by our material actions as opposed to spiritual ones. Remember that in Bhakti Yoga we are attempting to yoke or connect back to Krishna, the Supreme, through bhakti, or loving devotional service. And as we have been hinting at, service implies activity. Bhakti Yoga is active. It is not passive. To this point, in the introduction to his book, Nectar of Devotion, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada writes, practice means employing our senses in some particular type of work. Devotional service, Bhakti Yoga, in practice, means utilizing our different senses in service to Krishna. Some of the senses are meant for acquiring knowledge, and some are meant for executing the conclusions of our thinking, feeling, and willing. So practice means employing both the mind and the senses in practical devotional service. And then later in the introduction, Srila Prabhupada explains, devotional service is a sort of cultivation. It is not simply inaction for people who like to be inactive or devote their time to silent meditation. There are many different methods for people who want this. But cultivation of Bhakti Yoga is different. As soon as we say cultivation, we must refer to activity. Without activity, consciousness alone cannot help us. Now, the word cultivation is a really nice one to use. If we look it up in the dictionary, we find the following definitions. 1. The act of preparing land and growing crops on it, or the act of growing a particular crop. 2. The act of trying to develop and improve something. And 3. The act of making a special effort to establish and develop a friendship. All of these definitions actually work for our purposes today. Consider a garden. We nurture it through regular weeding, watering, and monitoring of the plants. Similarly, although the Supreme resides within our hearts, if we don't actively engage in our relationship with him, it will stagnate. It will fail to flourish, much like flowers in a garden that wither without consistent care and attention. Inviting the Supreme into our home is a method to give life to our personal relationship with him. It is so very personal to invite someone into our homes, and when we invite the Supreme in, he reciprocates, aiding us in deepening our understanding and connection with him. So just how do we invite the Supreme into our homes and cultivate our personal relationship with him? This past weekend, the members of Bhakti Fundamentals came up with some ideas, which we called the 3 C's. When cultivating a relationship with Krishna, focus on the following 3 C's at first. 1. Cooking for the Lord. 2. Creating a home altar space. 3. Chanting the names of the Supreme. Our little group at Bhakti Fundamentals thought that the above were doable action items for beginning to engage in a personal relationship with the Supreme. So let's take a look at each of these individually to start. Just as we would for visiting family or friends, we can actually lovingly cook for the Lord and offer Him the meals. Now in the Gita, we learn that Krishna accepts vegetarian food items, and so in Bhakti Yoga, we cook only vegetarian food items and then offer them to the Lord with love. These meals are then known as prasadam, a term that signifies mercy. And this conscious cooking process involves preparing all the ingredients, washing, cleaning, cutting, chopping, with Krishna in mind, intending the meal for Him. And then after cooking, we offer a prayer in which we formally present the meal to Krishna, humbly offering it to Him with love. This is akin to serving a meal to a friend in our home. By serving Krishna our meal first, we spiritualize our cooking. Next, our second C. We can also create a little home altar for Krishna, a space in our homes that reminds us of Him. This could be as simple as the top of a side table or other piece of furniture that you place paintings of Krishna on, and perhaps add some decorative items like flowers if you wish. It can be as simple or ornate as you like. Your altar can be even one small framed painting of Krishna. But this simple action of having a designated altar space has big returns. It will transform the energy in your home to a spiritual one. At your home altar, you can pray or engage in mantra meditation, or if it's large enough, you can even offer your food preparations to the Lord there. In fact, having a place where you offer your vegetarian food preps to Krishna is another reminder that we've invited Him into our home, and He now resides there also. Now, setting aside a space for Krishna like this in your home is somewhat akin to providing a guest with a comfortable spot, a designated space to sit down and relax. Again, the altar doesn't need to be fancy or ornate. It just needs to be heartfelt. Krishna accepts our sincere love. That's all He's looking for. Remember, you can always grow into a larger altar, so feel free to start with something small and simple. The benefit of having this home altar is being reminded of Krishna throughout our day when we walk by it. We will feel His presence more. So having a small home altar is one way in which we spiritualize our home. Now, once our guest is seated comfortably, we may sit down and converse with them. With the Supreme, this may take the form of revealing our hearts to Him in prayer. In Bhakti Yoga, it also means speaking the names of the Supreme in mantra meditation, which is a core practice in Bhakti Yoga. You may remember that we have already explored in one of our discussions how chanting the names of the Lord in a regulated manner, which is known as mantra meditation, is significant. Remember that the Maha Mantra that we chant in Bhakti Yoga, shown on screen, consists of the Supreme's names, with Krishna indicating He who is all attractive, Hare referencing the transcendental energy of the Lord, and Rama referring to His being the source of spiritual bliss, including the bliss that we feel in spiritual life. And recall that this mantra can be chanted in a group setting in the form of kirtan, which is mantra meditation set to music, or it can be chanted individually as japa, which is personal mantra meditation tracked on beads. One of the points here is that just as we all have names, so does the Supreme Absolute Truth. Krishna is a name of the Lord signifying that God ultimately draws every living entity, either directly via His internal potency or indirectly through His material energy. When we chant the Maha Mantra, we are praying to be engaged in the service of the Lord versus in the service of His material energy. Now, on this point of chanting His names, consider how odd it would be to talk to a sibling or friend without using their name, referring only to their title of sister or friend. While those terms describe relationships, names are so much more personal. Similarly, while the Supreme Lord is God, he has names, and his principal name, as revealed by the Supreme himself, is Krishna. He has other names, as we do in different contexts, to different people, but Krishna is his intimate name, known to those who are close to him, his close devotees. And chanting his names in mantra meditation is profoundly powerful. If we call out even our friend's name in a room that they happen to be sitting in, they look up at us and respond. Similarly, when we chant Krishna's name, he hears us from anywhere and everywhere and responds in a personal way. And what's more, we feel this reciprocation when we chant his names. Now, this past weekend, we also came up with some other ways to add Krishna to our daily lives. One of our family members was interested in the Bhagavad Gita, and we ended up discussing about how we can connect to Krishna by reading about him in the Bhagavad Gita. Just a little reading every day, perhaps in a book club with friends, makes a big difference. And in doing this, we learn about Krishna from Krishna himself. And what better source of information about him could there be? Now, for a second idea, since we all liked chanting in kirtan together this past weekend, we discussed the idea of listening to some kirtan of the Maha Mantra every day. There are some very nice ones on YouTube that we can recommend, actually, so reach out to us for some recommendations and we will be happy to provide them. Next, we discussed about holding your own little kirtan in the morning or evening before bedtime, even if it's just you alone singing. Personal mantra meditation on beads is really, really nice, but when the Maha Mantra is set to music, it captures our attention in a different way. It's difficult to describe and can only be experienced. Again, we have melodies we can recommend that are simple to follow, so reach out if you'd like to try holding your own kirtan at home. And finally, we discussed and tried out together chanting japa, personal mantra meditation, in the association of other like-minded individuals. A couple members of our group wanted to start a chanting call in which we all get online every day and chant as a group together for 30 or so minutes. It's really, really nice to do this. And we can also start these chanting circles with other friends and family members as well. Try starting a chanting circle with your friends or family members and see how it goes. Or join ours. We'd love to have you. So these are just some of the ideas that our group at Bhakti Fundamentals came up with to connect with the Lord in a personal manner. And this exercise shows that we don't have to make a grand show when we invite the Supreme into our personal lives. We can start by simply inviting him into our personal living space, a place that we frequent most of the time anyway. A key insight from today's discussion is that Bhakti Yoga doesn't require us to reject or renounce the material world. Instead, we simply incorporate Krishna into our existing lives, whatever they may look like. While this might necessitate some adjustments, like adopting a vegetarian lifestyle, the primary goal is to find ways to connect our current lives to Krishna. And the changes we make along the way will be positive ones, enhancing our lives significantly. In fact, most of the time we can keep doing as we are doing, working our day jobs, having a family, owning a home and cars, but we simply adjust our consciousness around all of these activities, people, and things, realizing that they come from and ultimately belong to Krishna, and thus we find ways to connect them to him. That will be the topic of our next class, actually, in much greater depth. But for now, here's an analogy that might help. Incorporating Bhakti Yoga into our lives is akin to driving a car toward a destination. Occasionally, we might need to make significant turns, but generally it's about making minor steering adjustments. The same principle applies in our spiritual journey. Our ultimate goal is spiritual in nature, which may require shifting away from a material mindset and altering some of our activities. However, these are mostly minor adjustments that integrate the Supreme into our lives in enriching and fulfilling ways. Krishna really makes it easy for us to connect our lives back to him. Our next class will explore this topic further. For now, however, it's just important to see that the size of our offering to Krishna doesn't matter. It's the quality that matters. It's our consciousness that matters. He appreciates our every effort to connect with him, even through the most ordinary things in our life. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 26, Krishna says, "If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it." Now, the amazing thing is that when we do offer Krishna our vegetarian food items, or flowers, or if we dedicate our activities to him, then these items and activities actually become spiritualized. And then these activities are activities by which we spiritually advance. That is amazing. In fact, it's all an amazing process created by Krishna himself. And this is because he so wants us to personally interact with him. In fact, Krishna states in the 4th chapter of the Gita, "As they take shelter of me, I reward them accordingly." In other words, as we link our lives to Krishna, he reciprocates with us, taking even more steps toward us than we do toward him. Just as we feel indebted and appreciative when someone treats us in a personal manner, so does Krishna. And A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada would often note that if we take one step toward Krishna, he takes 10 toward us. Now, at the beginning of our class, we noted that harmonizing our lives with the Supreme, which we have begun discussing today, is known as dovetailing, or more scientifically, as yukta vairagya, which indicates right or proper renunciation. We'll see what is meant by yukta vairagya in our upcoming class. For now, however, if we look up the word dovetail, it means to fit or cause to fit together easily and conveniently. Synonyms include harmonize, correspond, be in agreement, go together. Thus, as we mentioned just a few moments ago, what we'll find is that we don't actually need to renounce school, work, family, houses, cars, in order to live a spiritual life. Rather, we renounce a material approach to everything in that list in favor of a spiritual approach. We reject material consciousness in favor of spiritual consciousness. When we connect everything to Krishna via Bhakti Yoga, that is considered spiritual consciousness. When we see things, people, and activities as having no connection with Krishna, that is considered material consciousness. Therefore, in Bhakti Yoga, we practice seeing all of the things in our life, including our talents and abilities, everything really, as being provided by the Supreme. And then we consciously offer them in service back to Krishna. This forms a complete circle. What comes from the Supreme Lord is offered back to him. And then we feel that circle of completeness in our lives, leading to true harmony and fulfillment. This is what it means to dovetail our lives to the Supreme. And in keeping with our theme from last week, the reason we had our class on personhood last week is because dovetailing is the way in which we relate to Krishna on a personal level. It is the art of inviting Krishna into our daily lives. We use an image from the woodworking world to represent the topic of dovetailing because that's actually a dovetail joint on screen. Dovetail joints are one of the strongest joints in carpentry. They are woodworking seams that connect two pieces of wood by fitting them in with one another, in a way that is similar to connecting two puzzle pieces. The end of one piece of wood is complementary to the other, creating an interlocking corner. And this is how we want our lives to be with the Supreme. We want them to interlock seamlessly. So we'll talk about that more in our next class. Perhaps for now, start focusing on the 3 C's that we covered in today's discussion: cooking for the Lord, or offering your vegetarian food preps to him. You have to cook anyway, right? Creating a home altar space. Even one small painting will do, just, the top of a bookshelf, even something like that. and chanting the Maha Mantra a little every day. We'll add in some more ideas next time and in following classes, but these are certainly a great start, in fact, a huge start. But you don't have to implement all three at once, of course. Yet, we have an eager crowd at Bhakti Fundamentals, and so we're simply presenting your ideas from this past weekend here, and those three were three that we came up with. So stay tuned for part 2 next week. Thank you for listening today, and we look forward to hearing from you this week with any questions or ideas you may have. And we'll see you next time on Bhakti Fundamentals.